So, as the title of this workshop suggests, the goal of your teaching statement is to highlight a handful of objectives, goals, priorities, talk about the ways in which in the classroom, in the lab, in office hours, in designing your assignments or giving students feedback, how you're trying to achieve your goals, and then gesturing to outcomes and ways in which you see in student work, in student feedback, in conversations with your students, why your strategies seem to be succeeding in your classroom here at the beginning of your teaching career. Why do we ask you to do these things? Why are my slides not advancing? There we go. So why do we write teaching statements? Because hiring committees are asking you to do it. And is this a fair thing to ask of someone at the beginning of their teaching career? No. You might actually, if this were something you assigned to your students, you'd say this is kind of a bad assignment, but it's what we have to work with. Here are some current job ads that, because I've been looking through ads and working with people already on their applications. You can see at the left here in a STEM field, Bryn Mawr asking for a statement of teaching philosophy, and here the only guidance they give you is no more than 2 pages. That would be my default, by the way. Unless you get other guidance, I would say feel free to go to 2 pages. You might have to write a 1-page version. I would say wait until you get asked for that and then try to draft something that's 1 page. But I would start with your default as writing a 2-page statement. Here on the right, and the University of California is frequently good about giving people guidance on these things in the way that other schools don't. You've got this statement of teaching and mentoring. And here, especially for our STEM friends, even if it doesn't say mentoring, bring mentoring experience into your teaching statement. That's part of the teaching that you've done. You've worked with students in the lab, maybe younger PhD students, maybe undergrads, maybe high school students, all of that experience. And again, those outcomes are going to be relevant here. I mentored 6 undergraduates. I published a paper with 2 of them. 3 have gone to grad school. These are the kinds of things that can point to your successes as an early career mentor. Here you'll see that Berkeley provides some specific examples of the kinds of things that you could write about. And I think this is really constructive, and this is aligned with the kinds of things I'll tell you in a few minutes. And the other thing that they point to here, which is super important, is that it includes past efforts and future plans, right? So when you're writing your teaching statement, even if the prompt doesn't specify this, it's rooted in what you've done, and it looks ahead to what you will do in a way that's aligned with what the job ad is asking for, right? So the idea here isn't that you haven't done all the things, but it's that you've done some of the things and that you're thinking about the things that you would be called upon as an assistant professor at The Ohio State University to do next September. And I'm also here, by the way, to help you prep for that. So if I can help you get a job, huzzah. And if I can help you make the transition into that job, I also want to do that. I want to do all the things. By the end of this workshop, I'll have you provost. There we go. Whoops. Um, I am not going to lie to you. The teaching statement is not going to be the thing that gets you the job. But as James Lang, English professor and a well regarded authority on teaching, writes here, it can be the thing that gets someone's attention and makes them bring you up in the meeting where they're deciding who to long list. So you want to imagine that it could be something in your cover letter, it could be something in your research statement, or it could be something cool in your teaching statement that makes me walk down the hall and say to my colleague, take a good look at the Greenfield dossier. I think this candidate is really interesting for us. So we want the teaching statement to be as robust and as good a representation of who you are as your other documents, and think about how it works with the other pieces of your application and your letters of reference. And I'm going to rant about that in a few minutes. There will be ranting, I promise. Who are we writing for? Some of this is obvious, but it's still worth thinking about. Everyone who's reading this is relatively senior to you. It's a faculty audience. You might be applying for some things that are interdisciplinary, and I'm certainly happy to talk to you about that in a consult. But typically you're writing for people who are in your discipline, at least broadly speaking, even though they may have no knowledge of your particular subfield. You might be the first specialist in X or Y that this small department has hired. So they might not know a lot about what you actually do. Um, but you're addressing people who are teaching in broadly, maybe some similar teaching context to you, or maybe not. In any field, they're going to be reading a lot of applications. In some cases, committees might divvy up the piles, so not everybody's reading everything. In other cases, they might be reading all of them. My advisor, who was deeply cynical by the time I came into his care, said, you want to imagine somebody who doesn't want to be reading these files, but he knows he has to. And the bargain that he makes with himself is that he will read the first sentence of every paragraph. So keep your paragraphs short and have strong topic sentences. I think that was tongue-in-cheek advice, but I think it's not bad advice. You probably want to write these paragraphs in these documents shorter than in your academic prose because it's serving a different purpose. And you do want to imagine that some people are going to be skimming these things. And so you want to make sure that at a glance, your teaching experience, your teaching awards, and that sort of thing are visible. Some people are going to read the teaching statement closely, some people aren't. You want to make sure that someone who only looks at your CV and your cover letter knows that you are a phenomenal scholar teacher, equally to the person who does read your teaching statement. Um, But you want to imagine, this is a way I typically frame this, is that you want your teaching statement to motivate someone to want to talk to you, to ask you a follow-up question about your teaching. And that could indeed happen in a screening interview where they might literally have your teaching statement in hand and say, hey, tell me more about this cool assignment you designed in your Intro to Africana class. Okay? Um, don't try to imagine that you need to frame your teaching to meet the expectations of everyone who might read this. You have to make this true to yourself, and you have to, even as I'm well aware that academia is really good at hiring people who are like the people that are already in that department, this is a fact, right? This is why Penn looks a lot like it does. This is being recorded and transcribed. All right, good job, at will employee. Um, but you have to be optimistic enough to imagine that someone is like, oh, that's not how I approach that course, but I'm still intrigued and want to talk to this person because I think they have interesting ideas. And in some cases, it might be, wow, I struggle with getting students to learn that concept. What a phenomenal idea. We need to bring this person here for a campus visit. So you want to think about, sorry, my beloved colleague Karen and I take different approach to designing slides. There are many steps in this slide, but this is what I said. You want to think about how this fits together with your other materials, right? Cover letter. For most jobs, you're going to start talking about your research and then talk about the teaching that you've done and the teaching that you will do if you're hired as their new colleague. On your CV, make sure that I can skim down and find the teaching section and that I can readily see, oh, she's TA'd 4 times and she led recitations 3 of those times and had regular interactions with students running her own classroom. Then there's the teaching statement, more on which in a second. You might be called upon, and this is more likely for humanities friends and social scientists, who can also be friends, to have a teaching portfolio. And if you get asked to do this, I'm going to point you to a resource at the end of the talk from Career Services, but I'm also happy to work with you on this. And if the ad says you can submit evidence of teaching effectiveness, evidence of teaching excellence, that opens the door for you to say, here are my evals from Penn. And I can talk to you about how to organize those if you've got lots of them. Here's a sample syllabus. Here's a sample syllabus for a bread and butter intro class. Here's a sample syllabus for an upper division class that represents something new that I can bring to your curriculum, given my particular research expertise. And I said I was going to rant, and here it comes. Who among your letter writers knows anything about your teaching? You got to have one letter where at least one person, preferably someone who also knows your research, can write 2 pages about your project and then say, in addition to this, Sharon is a phenomenal teacher. Let me tell you how I know this. I sat in the back of a class on the day that she taught, yada, yada, yada. North American letters are laughably long and detailed. People in other parts of the world think we're mad, but this is what you're going to need because people that you're competing with are going to have this. So make a game plan with your committee. And if nobody on that committee knows anything about your teaching, somebody needs to step up and learn this. And it's totally normal. You didn't TA for anyone on your committee. The person you TA'd for, who maybe observed you, maybe, they can just send a paragraph to your PI and they can quote that person. I haven't had the chance to see Patty teach, but let me share with you what Professor Jones had to say about working with her last year. Insert paragraph of glowing praise. And I'm happy to talk more with you in a minute or in a one-on-one about game planning for this. What are we going to write about? This was actually signaled very nicely by that ad from Berkeley. It was very thoughtful of them. So here, each of you is going to make choices that make sense for you based on your experiences. But here I want you also to sort of orient it towards what teaching contexts in your field look like typically, right? So you typically would want to have unless you're told otherwise, the teaching statement isn't a chronological narrative. I'm going to put an asterisk on that because sometimes the ad might say that that is indeed what they want, and so give them what they want. But if they don't ask for that, I say you want to step back, think about your goals, think about a couple of views of you as a teacher that are going to be most relevant to a committee. Here's a paragraph giving you a sense of what it's like in my classroom. Here's a paragraph that lets you see how I think about assessing student learning and the interesting assignments that I've created and the way that I structure them and give students feedback. Here's a paragraph on mentoring. Again, mentoring opportunities are unevenly distributed. That's more for the STEM folks, but other folks, in the humanities, you might have worked in a summer program, a pre-freshman program, right, where you've been mentoring students, coaching them to get them ready for college. That could be totally relevant here. And so the decision, there's not one template for this, but you sort of want to think, if I'm in the humanities, I probably want to talk about how I get students to read and to write. What are the core skills that you're trying to teach, as opposed to talking just about the content that you're teaching. And the things that you talk about can be things that literally everybody in the discipline thinks about in teaching. You can't teach intro to physics without thinking about, okay, I'm bluffing. I don't know what that answer might be. But you can talk about things that are tried and true, or you could talk about things that are rather unique to you, but would still be of interest. And here again, I think that it can be a fruitful strategy to talk about. Everybody knows that it's hard to get students to engage with X or Y. And here's the interesting idea I've got for cracking that. Because again, you're addressing people who are, broadly speaking, teaching in your field mostly. And that you're including some of your ideas, obviously. As you accrue experience, it can feel a little risky, but it can be good to say the first time I taught X, here's what I tried, here's how it didn't work, and here's what I learned from that experience, and here's what I did the second time I taught that class, showing that you're learning and growing as a teacher, not that you have already mastered everything, although some of you may have. And that's what, again, I'm pointing to here. The idea is to just sort of, this is like reflecting on your evolution so far as a teacher. You're going to be writing these things not just for getting a job. You're going to be writing them for your reappointment and for your tenure. So you're going to be talking about your teaching journey deep into your career. If you're able to have an academic career, and if that's what you want, that's what I want for you. Even if it's called teaching philosophy, this isn't really meant to be philosophical. Most academics, even folks who are neuroscientists, don't particularly walk around thinking about how people learn. There might be some exceptions depending on what you work on, but most of the time, this is what I would call a craft statement, right? It's about, here's what I'm trying to do in my classes. Here's some of the stuff that I do, and here's why I think it's working, or here's how I'm trying to improve it, or here's how I will scale it up when I am teaching your 400-person intro class at The Ohio State University. And yes, I am getting paid by them to mention them several times in this workshop. But you really just want to be concrete and specific. Take us into that room on that day when you are teaching Conrad's Heart of Darkness. Tell us about, or when you're teaching the Krebs cycle, like bring us into a specific class context with a specific group of learners and the specific things that you did. And this is why it's good to keep good notes of what your lesson plans actually are, so that you can look up some of these specifics and talk about the great things that you have been doing in the classroom. And like the workshop has pointed to, you want to, I know it's anecdata, but you want to at least allude to, here's what I saw. Here's how I saw the students' writing improve after I created this workshop. Here's what I saw in their feedback based on this redesigned project, et cetera, et cetera. And hopefully some of that's going to be confirmed in the evals if the committee eventually looks at them, or corroborated by your letter writers. And this is not to uh, the gatekeeping function of the letters is just a fact, right? We can have mixed feelings about that, but you really want some of this stuff in those letters, given how important the letters are. That's why you want to share your evals with your faculty so that they can quote from some student comments about what a tremendous teacher you are. And like again, going back to that very helpful Berkeley ad, it can include what you will do. It's rooted in what you've done so far, but particularly if you're applying for something where you're going to be teaching graduate classes. You haven't done that yet, most of you, but you might want to have a paragraph talking about how you think about what makes for a good grad seminar and how you're thinking about moving into being a mentor for graduate students, right? So it's rooted in what you've done, but then looking ahead in a way that is relevant to this job. And the bad news is you're not going to just be able to do a mail merge here. I'm not suggesting you're going to need to have 40 unique teaching statements because that would be a full-time job in itself. But you might need to say, here are the 3 different buckets of jobs I'm applying for, and I'm going to have a slightly tweaked teaching statement for each of those so that it's nicely aligned with what the job calls for. And again, all of these things I'm happy to work with you on for as much as would be helpful for you. Okay, I'm going to tell you to do this and you're not going to do it, but I'm still going to tell you to do it. Just have a Word document where you can bung in a 2-sentence note about something that happened in your teaching. Because, like I said, you're going to get asked to do this again at your 3rd-year reappointment and at your tenure. And you don't want to have to be inventing a document about 3 years of teaching out of scratch. Make notes as you go. Some of you have heard me say this before, but there's a history professor at Emory who kept a teaching diary for a year and published it as a book with Penn Press. That's using the old bean, right? Make the teaching help with your scholarly output. If you haven't been observed by a mentor, they need to get themselves into a teaching setting that you're in. Try to arrange a guest lecture on a day when they're there, not when they're at a conference. And I realize this goes against all that is natural in the academic world, but they really need to step up for you and find the time to come and observe you teaching so that that can inform their letter. And if you need help strategizing this, or if you need me to try to be persuasive to one or more mentors, I'm happy to do that. And this is less likely for STEM folks, but the more teaching focused the jobs you're applying for, the more likely that they are going to be interested in getting a preview of teaching materials. In your spare time on an idle Friday night, start pecking away at drafting some sample syllabi. And again, I would say a good strategy would be bread and butter intro class, and then something more specialized at an upper division or in a grad level. Um, Academic Job Search Handbook. If you aren't aware of it, obviously you're aware of Career Services because you're here, but our esteemed colleagues at Career Services have produced this book over several editions. It was really a pioneering publication. It's available as an ebook through the Franklin catalog, and it's got all sorts of stuff. It's from how do I find job ads all the way to how do I negotiate my startup package. And it has anonymized sample materials of teaching statements and all the other things from folks in different disciplines. And since these are weird documents to write, go ahead and take a look at those just to sort of see what people have done. And then when you have a draft, come talk to Career Services, come talk to me. Would be happy to see you. And I think, yeah, CETLI earnestly wants to support you. We'll help you with your materials. I want to stay in my lane, but if you need someone to read a research statement, if your committee isn't responding to your requests for readers, I'm happy to be a lay reader for your stuff. We're happy to prep you for a Zoom interview. Career Services also does mock interviews. I typically think that you're practiced in talking about your research, but jump on a Zoom with me for 15 minutes and I'll ask you some questions about teaching. just to get practice. And then the more teaching focused the job, the more likely it is that you're going to get asked to do a teaching demonstration. But even at places like University of Michigan, University of Wisconsin, people have been asked to do both a classic job talk and a teaching demonstration. So even research universities are asking for teaching demonstrations now. Most of our faculty have no experience of these things, so typically your department can help you prep a job talk, but come and see us and we'll brainstorm with you about a teaching demo because they're always weird. You might parachute into somebody's class and you're teaching whatever they decided was going to be on the syllabus that day, even though it's a topic that you literally have never thought about in your life. You can still go in there and get the job. I worked with someone who did that last year. Um, you can come practice in our space, or sometimes if you're going to be working, if I know you're going to be working in a big lecture theater somewhere, I'll try to get a larger space to help you practice in a space that's more relevant. I mean, again, we're a small but mighty team of 2 in the grad unit, but we want to do anything we can to support you across this process because um, it's really rough. And anything we can do to help you get to the next step in your career is intensely meaningful. All right. That was a lot of me talking and showing slides. Now I want to see what wonderful things you put in the chat.
Looks like we have a question in the chat about would you bring in K-12 experience or is that too far out?
I think that I would oh, I'm sorry. I don't mean to be biased to a fellow historian, but Kimberly's this is an amazing accomplishment for Kimberly. Holy cow. Managing that stuff is it's amazing. I would be very selective. So I think that what I would imagine is I would imagine having at least one of your letters say in passing before she came to our program, so and so had 6 years of teaching in secondary school and brought a strong interest in teaching. In addition to her scholarly expertise, so that it sort of just dropped in there, but it's not the focus, because I do think most again, at a teaching centered institution, that a K to 12 experience as suggesting that you've got training in teaching, that you are adapting to teaching in the college space, that's going to be of more interest than to someone at a research university. So I would say selectively invoke it. Um, but have most of the content in your materials be about college level teaching. That would be my recommendation. And that's not, I'm not trying at all to be dismissive of K to 12 experience because obviously that involves more training than you get in graduate school to be a teacher. Um, sorry, let me. Oh wow, kudos as well to Bonnie. Um, Oh my God, co-teaching a class with a mentor? Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes. That would be great. Um, if hopefully because you're also being appropriately compensated for it. I would sometimes selectively recommend a little bit of self-exploitation for the purposes of getting some experience, but I do not want to steer you into teaching for free as a matter of course. Um, but I think team teaching where you're in the room with the mentor. I love seeing professors and their postdocs or professors and grad students teaching alongside each other. I think it's energizing for everybody. But again, so that they can write that letter that talks about what it was like to teach with you and what an amazing teaching partner you were, right? This is why I'm now very excited about the possibility of this. To Bonnie's question, and this is vexing, if I were in charge of the university, things would be different, my friends. Depending on how you're entered into the system, you may or may not have evals, and I'm happy to hop on a. Actually, let me. I'm happy to screen share with you and look and see or coach you through looking for that. Typically, if you had a lab section where you were the one working with the students or a recitation section, typically you will have your own evals. If you were a grader and doing office hours, even if you were in the room with the lead instructor all the time, you probably don't have them. And the only thing there's an item on the professor's evals where it says rate the quality of the TA. And so evals are unevenly distributed across campus in ways that are kind of frustrating. But I can, oh, yeah, I'm good to hang out in this Zoom until 11. So if you're free, I'm happy to stick around. Um, and so yeah, Bonnie, we can talk more. Um, Great question from Erica. And the answer is yes. So one variety, every candidate goes into Professor Jones's class because they want it to be comparable. And so you're doing whatever Professor Jones picked on that day. Another model, they want the same lesson from each finalist so they can compare you. So you're not in a real class, you're just doing a teaching demonstration in front of the committee and maybe some students that they lured in with pizza, but where you are again assigned a topic. Other variation is you parachute into my class and I say, teach whatever you want. And then maybe we have a little back and forth about what's something that's good for you that will also fit in with my class. Or it's not a real class and you get to pick whatever you want. And so this is the other thing that's kind of a pain in the ass is that you might need to find yourself, if you're successful, and I want you to get those campus invites, you might need to put together 6 different teaching demonstrations depending on what the assignment is. But again, come see us. We're happy to help you with that. Um, One thing I would say is that if you do have a choice, it can be a good strategy to pick a topic that has nothing to do with your research so that you show you've got range. Because this is a fact about 99% of academic jobs. Range is prized. Being able to teach a bunch of things as opposed to just being able to teach about being a fox rather than a hedgehog, as the saying goes, is going to be valuable in most jobs. So like when I was on the job market, which was admittedly before you were born, I worked on the 19th and 20th century, but I did a teaching demonstration about Mughal India to show that I wasn't just someone who focused on the modern era. And I did stuff involving art, which had nothing to do with my research. And you might say, but you did it badly. And I would say, hush. Uh,
Mm.
yeah, okay. So a classic research job talk, here I would really hope that your mentors in your department can coach you on this. I would say in my side of the world, there's a choice that people make where you either give it's a talk based on a chapter from your project, or sometimes people will choose to do a talk that's like an overview of the whole project. I tend to think that a piece of the project is better because it shows with more granularity your methods and what's cool about who you are, and that sometimes the big picture talk can kind of seem a little bit a little sparse. But this is really going to be, again, the audience for the thinking about the job talk, it is thinking about presenting to faculty first, even if some students will be invited to it, unless you get instructions that are otherwise. But I would really hope that folks in your department can offer you some insights about what the specific norms of job talks are. Because in some disciplines, you give your talk and people ask questions at the end. In other disciplines, people start asking you questions from the first slide, and it's a rather more confrontational setup, which I think is really hard to prepare for, and frankly sounds horrible to me. Um, um, That's a great comment from Sydney that, check with your faculty if you don't have your own evals, because sometimes students will say, I learned more from the TA than I learned from you, buddy. And that could be, if your faculty is willing to embrace that, then they could lean into that feedback. Um, I don't want to keep y'all because I know we promised you a half hour, and that goes for Patty and Sharon, but I am happy to hang out if anyone has other questions. I hope that this felt constructive, at least as a beginning. And again, for those folks who joined after I originally posted this, the annoying thing where you can't see what was in the chat before you joined the meeting, there's my email again, and would be happy to hear from you. Thank you, Kimberly. It's nice to see you. Listen, good luck, everybody, and I hope that Career Services and CETLI can help you, and that we can see some happy outcomes. I got to say this. Some of you have heard me say this before. This is about selling your labor under late capitalism. I do not want to romanticize this at all. This is work, it's labor, but I earnestly do want to help you get this job if that's what you want.
Ian, thank you so much for joining us today. I just wanted to briefly share a couple of other programs in our series that are happening today and then into next week. So you can find more details about that in Handshake. And then also, please, as Ian mentioned, please feel free to reach out to Ian directly to connect, or you can schedule an appointment with one of our advisors here in Career Services, and we'd be happy to help you with anything that we can in the application process as you are entering the job market. So thank you all so much for taking the time to be with us today. We really appreciate you being here, and we hope to see you at future sessions. So thank you again. Have a great day, everyone.
Bye.